This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. The death toll rises to 52 after two boats carrying migrants sink off the coast of Djibouti. We hear from a survivor.
A few minutes after sailing from the coast, the sailor jumped from the boat after an engine failure. Then it capsized.
Cameroon's main opposition leader, Maurice Kamto, is under investigation for alleged insurrection. His lawyers say he faces 8 charges. We speak to the families demanding justice over the deaths of their children who died in what appears to be ritualistic killings in Tanzania. Also in the program, fighting AIDS in Africa. Art made from medication is being showcased in a novel exhibition to help educate Ugandans about the history of HIV.
If these interventions are well preserved, and the best place to do that is a museum, it will help contain future epidemics.
And in sport, it's deadline day, just a few hours left before the January football transfer window closes, and more African players have been on the move. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The first video is now emerging after two boats capsized off the coast of Djibouti earlier in the week. The death toll has now risen to 52. So far, there are only 15 survivors and more than 60 are still missing. Now, while rescue workers continue to recover bodies, the United Nations is calling on more to be done to stop tragedies like this. The BBC's Emmanuel Igunza has more.
Search and rescue efforts have continued for a second day after two boats capsized off the coast of Djibouti on Wednesday. Dozens perished as the boat sank. These pictures are a reminder of their tragic last journey. 16 people are lucky to be rescued alive from one boat that authorities believe had as many as 130 people on board. Another boat is still missing.
Our Coast Guards found dead bodies of 52 migrants, and death toll may go up and the operations are still ongoing.
Survivors have recounted how one of the overloaded boats ran into trouble in the high seas half an hour after setting from northeastern Djibouti.
I moved from Tajora by foot to Obok, where I met with a trafficker. He took us to the coast side where we boarded a boat. There were 85 of us migrants on that single boat. A few minutes after sailing from the coast, the sailor jumped from the boat after an engine failure. Then it capsized.
Djibouti has in recent years become a transit point for migrants heading to find work on the Arabian Peninsula. So far, identities and nationalities of those who perished remains unknown. But the International Organization for Migration says majority of those attempting the perilous journey over the years have been from Ethiopia, Eritrea and Somalia, all attempting to pass through war-torn Yemen. They will then try to cross over Saudi Arabia or Oman in search of better lives. These deaths come even as the United Nations Refugee Agency released a new report highlighting a decline in the number of new refugees and migrants arriving into Europe.
It's more an indication of the fact that it's getting more and more difficult for people to flee and find safe access to asylum, rather than the fact that there are fewer problems that people are fleeing from.
Yemen is one of those countries where people are fleeing conflict. The UN has described the situation there as world's worst humanitarian crisis. And yet, as this latest tragedy highlights, people are still prepared to make the journey, even if it ends like this. Emmanuel Igunza, BBC News, Addis Ababa.
Well, joining me now from Berlin is Ismail Ainashe, a journalist who reports on the Horn of Africa region. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on the program. The question about what makes people migrate has been asked over and over. Is it fair now to say that this trend of, the exodus will never end?
Well, Sophie, as you rightly point out, the movement of people across the Horn of Africa into Yemen has been ongoing for several years. And what this tragedy today reveals, with the two boats capsizing off the coast of Djibouti, is that this perilous situation has been ongoing for a very long time. And as the IOM has said, the UN's Refugee Agency has said that more needs to be done when it comes to the movement of people from the Horn of Africa into Yemen, which, by the way, continues to experience the worst humanitarian disaster in the world. And it shows the mark of how desperate these people are, that they would risk so much life and limb in order to move from Ethiopia, often in Somalia and Eritrea, via these makeshift boats into war-torn Yemen.
Ishmael, I'm wondering, because countries recently adopted the Global Compact on Refugees, how much do you envision this helping out this whole crisis?
Well, I think often the region in the Horn of Africa has been forgotten, and the movement of people from the Horn of Africa into the Middle East, many who are migrant workers who are seeking a better life from Ethiopia, Somalia and Eritrea, have often been forgotten, and the focus has actually been very much on the movement of people from North Africa, largely Libya, into Europe. And I think what we've seen today is a stark reminder that more needs to be done, and measures such as the one you pointed out can help alleviate these issues. But really, ultimately, the real problem is that more needs to be done to tackle the root causes that motivate people to take risky decisions to cross perilous waters in search of a better life.
The people who were on that boat, majority of them were Ethiopians. One would think that given the current regime change and the positives that we are seeing from the country, that would discourage them from leaving.
Well, the situation in Ethiopia is still somewhat volatile. We have seen some extraordinary changes in the second largest country in Africa, which continues to have the fastest growing economy. Despite the efforts of Dr. Abiy to change the situation in Ethiopia, what we have seen is that people are still not voting with their feet and are still very much looking to move from Ethiopia via the choppy waters of the Gulf into Yemen. And unfortunately, more needs to be done to tackle this.
All right, Ishmael Ainashe, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. Thank you. Well, let's now take a quick look at other stories making headlines across Africa. There have been more anti-government protests in Sudan on Thursday in the second biggest city, Omdurman, and the capital, Khartoum. Demonstrators are calling for the president to step down. Meanwhile, Omar al-Bashir has ridiculed his opponents' use of social media to organize protests against his rule, saying a change in government won't happen via WhatsApp. A few hours earlier, Sudan reopened its border with Eritrea that's been closed for over a year, reportedly over fears of weapons tracking. President Omar al-Bashir made that announcement at a rally in Kassala, saying, and I quote, "Eritreans are our brothers and our people. Politics will not divide us." Nigeria's main opposition candidate in next month's elections, presidential election, Atiku Abubakar, has said he'd consider amnesty for people who surrender their stolen cash. Mr. Abubakar argued that money acquired through corruption and held abroad was unlikely to ever be retrieved through traditional means. The comments caused controversy on social media. Now, Cameroon's main opposition leader, Maurice Kamto, is under investigation for alleged insurrection. His lawyers say 8 charges have been leveled against him and 200 other detainees. Now, he was arrested on Wednesday after his supporters staged banned weekend demonstrations. Kamto and his party, the Cameroon Renaissance Movement, claimed that they won the election in October, in which Paul Biya was declared winner. His lawyer, Christophe Ndong, told the BBC that Mr. Kamto would face years in prison.
These charges that have been levied against Professor Maurice Kamto are charges that are ranging minimum from 5 years to life imprisonment. In fact, he stands the risk to be given life imprisonment from 5 to life imprisonment. These are the charges that are levied against him. But we are saying these charges cannot hold. It is weighty, watery, and cannot stand the test of time, because this is a politically motivated manifestation. This is a political problem and has to be solved politically, not through the law courts.
Tanzania has launched a manhunt for suspects in the abduction and murder of up to 10 children this month in what is believed to be ritualistic killings. The children, aged between 3 and 6 years, reportedly had their body parts removed for superstitious beliefs. Leonard Mubali reports that the victims' families are now demanding justice.
Golden Mfugale will never see his son again. Goodluck was abducted last week. His body was found mutilated and dumped in bushes just 1 kilometer from the family home.
I removed his clothes one by one. The body was rotten. Some of his body parts were missing. There was nothing in his stomach, but other parts like his legs were okay. And being a parent, I was able to identify that this was my son.
Helen Bryson is grieving too. Her son was also taken.
As
a parent, I'm hurt. It pains me because my child had dreams. He was young, just 5 years old. He wanted to be a doctor or a pastor. His dream has been cut short. Where will we get great leaders who will help us?
These children are part of a number of killings in the Njombe district in the past month. All were found with the body parts removed. Authorities say this mutilation is linked to witchcraft practices. The Tanzanian government say they have already identified some of the suspects.
I assured the community that we can end this situation. I have already instructed the police force on what to do, so they can end this issue. I want them to finish this investigation as soon as possible.
But the victims' parents say more needs to be done to protect their children. Leonard Mubali, Njombe, BBC News.
This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come, in American football, we're building up to Super Bowl 53 this weekend, and one man will be hoping that Nigerian fans will be watching. I'm Sophie Ikenye, and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The top stories on this program: the death toll rises to 52 after 2 boats carrying migrants sink off the coast of Djibouti on Tuesday. Cameroon's main opposition leader, Maurice Kamto, is under investigation for alleged insurrection. His lawyers say he faces 8 charges. Now, the Member of Parliament who circulated pictures of murdered undercover journalist Ahmed Hussein Swale has been defending his actions. Ken Ajiapong also verbally assaulted a fellow MP in Parliament on Wednesday for recommending sanctions against him. Mr. Ajiapong has been speaking to the BBC's Thomas Nadi about his controversial comments relating to the journalist.
No, don't allow the guy to come to this premises again. When you see him here, beat him up because he's a bad boy. I said that. Did I say that I give a reward for anybody to go and beat him or kill him?
You never said that?
No. Yeah.
You said if they see him,
beat him up.
Beat him up anywhere.
My premises.
It's on record.
Yeah, my
and
premises.
You also said that you'll be responsible for it.
Yeah, my premises.
You said said you'll be responsible for it.
Yes, if he comes to my premises, anywhere my premises, beat him up. I'll be responsible for it. Because that time I had started exposing them. So if you allow this guy to come, and knowing what I know, he will come and set me up. And I won't let them set me up. So I said that.
So what was the motive behind circulating Ahmed's pictures?
Yeah, the motive behind for circulating those pictures was to warn Ghanaians of that guy when they come to their premises, because that is what they do.
You are a member of Parliament and you believe in the rule of law.
Yeah.
So why didn't you report them to the police?
Report who to the police?
You said you had evidence against Anas and Ahmed.
Yes.
That they were defrauding people.
Yes.
That's what you said.
Yes.
And then doing all sort of bad things.
Yes.
Which is against the law.
Yes.
So why didn't you report them to the police?
I don't trust the police.
You don't trust the police in this country?
Read my lips.
You don't trust the police?
I don't trust the police.
In Ghana?
Yes. Read my lips.
Do you think you bear some moral responsibility for what happened to him?
Bear moral responsibility? No. I am rather saving Ghanaians from criminals. And I have no regret.
You have no regret for what happened to Ahmed Hussein?
What has happened to him, yes. But showing his pictures, no regret.
Now, for many, Uganda is seen as a beacon of hope in Africa's fight against AIDS after slashing its infection rate and the number of people dying from the virus in half since 2010. There are almost 37 million people in the world living with HIV. Most of them live in Africa. Swaziland, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Botswana are the countries with the worst infection rates. Now, Uganda used to be among them, but now just over 1 million Ugandans, or around 6%, are living with AIDS. By acknowledging the virus early on, the country made significant headway on curbing the disease, and a new exhibition detailing the country's fight against AIDS is hoping to keep it that way.
Pros Kevin Naluboa was diagnosed with HIV in 1991. She has lost one child and countless loved ones to the virus.
And I'm seeing some pictures of fellow friends who passed away. I know that even if I die, even myself, they will be seeing me and they will not forget about me.
The exhibition has brought back vivid memories, including the time she was attacked for standing in a local election 2 decades ago.
They came and said, you don't stand again. Do you know that you are HIV positive? You see, look at your body. You go away. We are not going to vote when you are here. You are HIV positive. You are dead.
The first tested case of HIV in Uganda was in 1982. High-profile campaigns by the government and influential leaders helped to fight stigma, and scientific research aided in getting treatments for it. Organisers hope showcasing this medical history can preserve it for future generations.
Very effective interventions have been done to the extent that if these interventions are well preserved, and the best place to do that is a museum, it will help contain future epidemics.
These quilts date back to the early 1990s. They bear the names of some of the people who have died from AIDS. By the late 1990s, it was estimated that over 1 million children had been orphaned because of the disease. And there are also newer exhibits being shown here. Barbara makes art from medication bottles to educate people. She first tested positive for the virus in 2008. Overall, HIV rates are reducing, but there's concern that they're on the rise amongst young people. Last year alone, 15,000 people between the ages of 15 and 24 were infected. The figure is partly blamed on less information being available and because young people didn't live through the dark days of the epidemic. Barbara hopes that by seeing the amount of medication people living with HIV need to take, some will be shocked into taking precautions against contracting the virus.
Someone will stop looking at how pretty I am. They'll stop looking at how good I am at speaking and convincing and everything. They will look at what I have had to go through to keep looking the way I look, to have the energy I have.
Organisers want visitors to leave inspired and informed. Plans are underway to take this exhibition to rural communities and set up a permanent museum on HIV and AIDS. Catherine Biarahanga, BBC News, Kampala.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Let's find out what's happening in the world of sport with Mimi.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Now, just a few hours left before the January football transfer window closes. And on the move is Senegal striker Mbaye Diagne, who has signed for Galatasaray from Turkish rivals Kasimpasa on a 4.5-year deal, which is reported for $13.7 million. Here's currently the top scorer in Turkey's Super League with 20 goals from 17 games. And Cameroon international Gaël Onganamuit has joined struggling Spanish side Malaga on a 1-year deal. Still staying with the transfers, Liverpool and Senegal international Sadio Mane is one of the biggest names in African football. Yet, academies in the country are struggling to make money despite being in the top 3 in African countries when it comes to the number of overseas professionals. Tatiana Mosso with more.
In 2018, Senegal was behind only Nigeria and Ghana in Africa when it came to the numbers of its players overseas and 15 worldwide. But despite this status, that does not tell the whole story, as the deputy chairman of one club with a well-known academy explains.
As far as transfers are concerned, there is a lack of respect for the African market. Training compensations are always disputed and foreign clubs rarely want to pay them. Meanwhile, we see huge contracts for Brazilian players of the same level as African players being accepted without hesitation.
About $1.5 billion is spent annually on transfers of South American players and just $500 million for Africans. The rift is justified by some and attributed to higher wages in Europe and South America. But for the ex-agent of the legend Didier Drogba, other factors come into play.
Some people still believe they should spend less money on buying African players. And unfortunately, many clubs are willing to accept the degrading terms.
This Premier League incubator is recognized as one of the best in Africa. A conveyor belt of football talent to European leagues. Set up in the year 2000, over 30 of its players have joined European teams. Among them, Ismail Assar, Diafra Sakho, and one of the world's most expensive players of all time, Sadio Mane. Nonetheless, Generation Foot cannot financially survive without the input of League Two side Metz, which became its partner in 2003, shortly after the academy was founded. African nations have produced some of the greatest football talent in the world. But as Senegal makes clear, many academies on the continent are still struggling to achieve their financial goals.
Next, Crystal Palace forward Wilfried Zaha has been charged with improper conduct by the Football Association following his side's 1-1 draw at Southampton on Wednesday. The charge of the Ivory Coast international follows Zaha's sarcastic applause of a referee after being dismissed in the 87th minute at St. Mary's. Away from transfers and to appointments, Morocco's Confederation Cup holders Raja Casablanca have named Frenchman Patrice Carteron as their new coach. The 48-year-old replaces Spaniard Juan Carlos Garrido, whose contract was ended by the club on Monday. Carteron has signed until the end of the season with an option to renew after that. And finally, in American football, we are continuing with our build-up to Super Bowl 53 this Sunday, which will see the New England Patriots take on the LA Rams. Well, Samson Ebuka, who was born in Nigeria and plays for the Rams, is pleased to see more Africans playing in the NFL. He's hoping that Nigerian fans will be tuned in this weekend.
Definitely feels good because, I mean, there is quite a bit of us now in the NFL, so it definitely feels good to be a part of that because kind of like how baseball is going out of the country just to find talent, there's definitely solid talent in Nigeria that can play football, American football, and come here and just to play that sport and have an opportunity to make something of themselves just to give their family a better living situation.
And that's all the sports. Back to you, Sophie.
Mimi, I'm sure you'll be watching that that game.
Very closely, and it's great to see, as you said, more Africans doing so well in the NFL. It's not your football that you see in Europe. It's good to have something else.
Who else do you know there?
Oh, we had the Cameroonian player yesterday. Don't forget that we as well, for the New England Patriots, that we featured here on the show. So
all right, good. Looking forward to it too, Mimi. Thank you. Now, don't forget, you can get in touch with me on Twitter. I'm @CKenya. That's it from the program. From the rest of the Focus on Africa team, thank you for your company.